If you want to know the secrets of existence and the true meaning of life, I can't help you. But if you want some book recommendations, why not try reading the ones I wrote? If you're a fan of giant monster mayhem and anime weirdness, why not try Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1? If horror is more your style, you can't go wrong with The Occult Mafia. Those who enjoy their fantasy with a dark twist may be interested in Emerald of Maddox City. And if you're interested in shared universes, why not read all three? Hop on down to the description for links to all 3 books on Amazon. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I was right. Not long before my brief hiatus, I made a video called Of Looney Tunes and Hollow Gestures, in which I looked at 3 recent decisions made regarding the Looney Tunes, and how each of those decisions was ultimately not really a good one. Those decisions are as follows. First, Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam are no longer allowed to use guns as comedy props. They can apparently use anything else, including dangerous bladed weapons and household items you might find anywhere, but they're not allowed to use guns because Hollywood is very anti-gun these days. The second decision was to redesign Lola Bunny, giving her a less voluptuous figure in order to, and I quote, desexualize her. And the third decision was to censor Pepe Le Pew, completely eradicate him. He is no longer in Space Jam: A New Legacy, even though he only had 1 scene. He won't be involved in any other new Looney Tunes projects moving forward. He is gone. Effectively censored, effectively cancelled. I do not intend to repeat myself here, but as stated, I felt that all of these were stupid decisions, made to kowtow to cancel culture, a group of people who clearly do not understand what comedy is, and honestly probably aren't going to be in the main audience that sees Space Jam: A New Legacy anyway. They just want to destroy whatever they find offensive. And ultimately all of that censorship amounts to absolutely nothing because the Looney Tunes are not the source of society's problems. Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam do not promote gun violence, Pepe Le Pew does not promote rape culture, and Lola Bunny may create a few furries here and there, but she doesn't turn people into outright weird sexual deviants either. But it all pretty much happened, and all I could really do was talk about how stupid it was and hope that maybe one day the world would come to its senses. Since then, the trailer for Space Jam: A New Legacy has debuted, and that's where things get interesting. First of all, there are guns in the trailer. At the very least, Yosemite Sam is allowed to use guns for the shoot the ball gag, one of the few gags in the trailer that I actually laughed out loud at. Now that would seem to contradict the new policy of guns not being allowed in Looney Tunes anymore, so how they managed to get in here, I really don't know. It's not just that Yosemite Sam happens to have them, they are a prominently featured prop in one of the trailer's scenes, and presumably that scene is going to be in the movie. So, did Warner Brothers just sort of change their minds when no one was looking? I don't know what made this change come about, but if Warner Brothers really has recanted that policy, good. After all, you watch Looney Tunes cartoons on HBO Max, you will see that it is just as violent, or sometimes even more violent than the Looney Tunes have ever been. And that's in spite of the fact that there are no guns anymore, and some of that violence can be implemented with items you can find in any American household. Taking away the guns and leaving everything else on the table was a completely pointless move. So it's just as well that Sam has his guns back. I don't know if Elmer has his gun either in this movie, and I don't know if this is going to be a permanent change or if it's just for this movie, but either way, the scene is in the trailer and no one seems to be freaking out about it. But now we get to the really interesting stuff. Now, again, just to remind you, Lola Bunny was redesigned to have a less feminine figure because she was being quote-unquote desexualized, even though arguably she had already been desexualized in her previous incarnations, and Pepe Le Pew had been outright cancelled/censored because he was accused of promoting rape culture, even though his worst offense is being oblivious to how aggressive he comes across when he's flirting. But when LeBron James gets dragged into what is essentially the HBO Max server, he flies past all sorts of different worlds representing different properties owned by the AT&T, Time Warner, HBO Max umbrella, if you will. One of those things he flies past is a big, prominently displayed in-your-face logo for Game of Thrones, a dark fantasy series which aired on HBO and is rated mature audience for extreme bloody violence, nudity, and rape. Oh, and one of the dragons from Game of Thrones shows up later, so they're really pushing Game of Thrones here. Also appearing in the trailer, the villain protagonists from A Clockwork Orange, a group of violent, deranged, rebellious, anti-establishment punks who, yes, commit the act of rape within the film. So to recap, Lola Bunny having the body of an adult human woman and Pepe Le Pew being enthusiastic in his flirtation, those are things so horrible and heinous that they either need to be changed or completely removed from the picture. But advertising Game of Thrones and A Clockwork Orange, that's just fine. I cannot be the only one who sees the contradiction there. You know, that initial article that condemned Pepe Le Pew also condemned Speedy Gonzales as being offensive to Mexicans. And what's shocked me about that isn't that cancel culture came for Speedy again, but rather that people were acting like it was something brand new. Because I saw so many different commentaries going, I've never heard of this before. Since when is Speedy Gonzales considered offensive to Mexicans? Meanwhile, last year I did a video recapping the time Speedy was effectively censored back in the turn of the millennium, his cartoons completely removed from Cartoon Network on those exact same grounds of being an offensive Mexican stereotype, only for it to eventually come out that Mexicans love Speedy Gonzales. These days, turns out nothing has changed. Mexicans still love Speedy Gonzales. In fact, they love Speedy Gonzales as much as they hate the term Latinx. Fortunately, that bit of news got out fast enough to prevent Speedy from being cancelled, but Pepe is still sealed away in the vault. And it's dumbfounding that no one thought, hey, if this guy was wrong about Speedy, maybe he's wrong about Pepe too. And if you do your research, you'll know that, yes, Pepe Le Pew is actually being misunderstood in this article. He is in fact an open mockery of people who are hopeless Casanovas. He's not condoning it, he's condemning it through comedy. But we can't expect people who don't know how comedy works to understand that sort of thing. And yet, the characters from A Clockwork Orange are still in this movie. Now true, they're in the background, prominently in the background, but in the background all the same, but this is the internet age. Anyone, including a child, could potentially look up the different Easter eggs and cameos that appear in Space Jam: A New Legacy, and thus find out about A Clockwork Orange, and be drawn to it and try figuring out what it is and be exposed to it before they're actually mentally ready to see it. To anyone who said that Pepe Le Pew's censorship was justified, I challenge you to justify that. Now you might say, but Omni, you have to take A Clockwork Orange in context. Everything that happens in there is done for some sort of commentary, and it was a different time after all. That sort of commentary was necessary for that age. Yes, I agree. The same thing applies to Pepe Le Pew. So we can either accept that Pepe Le Pew, despite being the product of another time, is still a commentary on something that needs to be considered, or we can censor A Clockwork Orange right along with him and strike that from the movie as well. Personally, I don't think either of them should be censored. What do you think? As for the Game of Thrones logo and dragon, you might say, what's the big deal? It's just a logo. No one's going to know what that is. No harm ever came from a logo. True, maybe it is just a logo. You know what else is just a logo? This Marlboro billboard from Superman 2. But it's not just there as set dressing. Marlboro paid good money to have that billboard in the film because they knew kids were going to see Superman 2. So for them, this was advertising. Now, of course, Marlboro would never openly condone children smoking. You're not supposed to smoke until you turn 18. Then again, they can't exactly stop kids from smoking before they turn 18, now can they? They knew what they were doing. The prominent featuring of the Game of Thrones logo in the Space Jam trailer is the same kind of advertisement. Only instead of advertising death sticks, it's advertising a fantasy series full of content that's not for children, even though the show is in a genre that children would certainly be interested in. And they don't even have to do any digging like they would for A Clockwork Orange. They know what title to look for this time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I opened this video proclaiming that I was right. Because you cannot censor Pepe Le Pew and desexualize Lola Bunny on grounds that you don't want to expose children to bad sexual behavior, while at the same time advertising A Clockwork Orange and Game of Thrones in a movie that you know is going to be seen by children. If you're going to keep those things, then the censorship and redesigns are completely hollow gestures. They mean nothing, because you have still given your full stamp of approval for something that is full of nudity and rape and sexuality. Now don't get me wrong, folks, I am not saying that those references to R-rated material should be removed from the film. In fact, referencing R-rated material would be right in line with the first Space Jam movie. Remember this Quentin Tarantino reference from the first film? Yeah, that happened. What I'm saying is that you cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot leave in stuff from R-rated movies while removing the least offensive elements from the main source material and proclaiming you're doing good works. It doesn't work that way. But then again, that's cancel culture for you, isn't it? It's not just that cancel culture only knows how to destroy, it's that it only knows how to destroy the wrong things. To put it in allegorical terms, cancel culture is what happens when somebody struts down the beach, proclaiming that they are saving everyone by stepping on tiny hermit crabs that weren't bothering anybody, but when someone points out into the water and says, "That person is surrounded by sharks, somebody go out and help them," the person who was stepping on crabs will come up with any sort of excuse not to go out and help. After all, stepping on crabs is easier than saving someone from a shark. Just as censoring a cartoon skunk who never actually hurt anyone is much easier than, say, campaigning against human trafficking. I once saw somebody post something online asking cancel culture why they don't turn their attention towards things like trafficking or pedophilia or child pornography. Because, after all, cancel culture seems to get immediate results whenever they demand something, so why can't they use those powers for stuff that's actually harming people? It was sarcastic, of course, for the reasons I just stated, but honestly, I hope cancel culture never actually tries to do that sort of thing. I hope they leave those sort of things to the real activists. Because quite frankly, if cancel culture were to take on something like human trafficking, they probably just burned down whatever city they noticed a high level of disappearances in and proclaimed that they had done a good job, all while the human traffickers had already moved on to some other city. I'd rather not find out whether or not I'm exaggerating. You know, the biggest irony of all is that I shouldn't have to be explaining any of this, least of all to Warner Brothers. Because as it turns out, Warner Brothers had their own answer to cancel culture nigh unto 20 years ago. You remember the Looney Tunes Golden Collections? I happen to have the whole set. They were the Looney Tunes collections for DVD. And with the first 2 volumes, they were the relatively inoffensive ones. The popular things like What's Opera Doc and Duck Amuck, these were the shorts that were generally free of offensive content. But once they started moving past these volumes, they started dipping into the shorts that had slightly more questionable material in them. Stuff that would have been considered just part of the culture back in the day, but might not necessarily fly in the politically correct culture of the early 2000s. So what to do? Do you not release those shorts? Do you perhaps edit the shorts to remove the offensive content? No. Warner Brothers instead did 2 different things. Starting with Volume 3, they put a little warning on the back stating that these collections were made for adult collectors and might contain material not suitable for children. And second, they had video introductions at the beginning of each disc, which were eventually replaced by just a still image of text, in which it was stated that some of the stuff in these shorts is from a different time. It would be considered offensive to most sensible people these days, and it was just as wrong then as it is now, but we're going to still release them completely unaltered because ultimately it's better to have them available than to not have them available, because removing them is basically the same as pretending they never happened at all. Fun fact, similar warnings were placed on collections of Sesame Street DVDs that contained older episodes. Now, doesn't that sound like a more reasonable way to approach this stuff? to look at it and say, all right, our sensibilities have changed. What used to be acceptable maybe isn't so acceptable anymore, but it's ultimately better to have them available so that we can know what that stuff used to be like, rather than just pretend that it never happened in the first place. But instead, the current policy that's sweeping the nation is, it potentially makes me feel uncomfortable, therefore it must be destroyed with extreme prejudice. Now, this may come as a shock to some people, but when Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451, he did not intend for the book-burning firemen to be role models, nor did he intend for their society to be an idyllic one. It's not an instruction manual, it's a warning. A warning that we clearly did not take to heart. In the end, though, my advice to Warner Brothers is to stop kowtowing to cancel culture. You didn't used to care about political correctness when it came to your animation. You had a devil-may-care attitude. You were against censorship. Now you're actually going ahead and approving censorship. It's a slippery slope. You censor Pepe Le Pew for behavior that's not what you think it is. Before you know it, you're gonna run out of characters to censor. You can either completely sanitize all of your stuff, or you can get back to making good entertainment. The choice is yours. But as long as you continue censoring and redesigning for no reason, and removing stuff that doesn't need to be removed, and kowtowing to people who don't get the joke, and pretending that what you're doing makes a difference, I can promise you, no actual difference is ever going to be made. But hey, what do I know, right? Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
If you enjoyed what you just saw, hop on down to the description for links to Patreon, DeviantArt, and all of our social media, as well as links for Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, and Emerald of Maddox City, 3 original novels I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.